The coffee maker was making that strange noise again. Chief Engineer Maria Rodriguez frowned at the machine as it wheezed and gurgled in the corner of the bridge. She had fixed it 3 times this week, but the old beast kept acting up. On a ship like the Defiance, you learned to make do with what you had. "Jump in 30 seconds!" called out Navigator Tom Walsh from his station. His fingers danced across the controls, checking and double-checking their course. They were heading back to Earth after a routine survey mission in the Outer Rim. Nothing exciting, just mapping some empty space and taking pictures of rocks. Captain Sarah Chen sat in her command chair, sipping her morning coffee from a chipped mug that read, "World's Okayest Captain." She had bought it as a joke, but it had become her favorite. The bridge around her was small and cramped compared to the massive warships Earth had started building, but the Defiance was reliable. She had been flying for 15 years, and this little exploration vessel had never let her down. "All systems green," reported Communications Officer Jake Morrison. He was young, barely out of the academy, but he knew his job. "Ready for hyperspace? Jump!" "Take us home, Tom," Sarah said, settling back in her chair. The familiar hum of the hyperspace drive filled the ship. Sarah felt that slight tug in her stomach as reality bent around them. It was a feeling you never quite got used to. No matter how many times you jumped. The stars outside the windows stretched into long lines of light, and then they were gone, racing through the strange non-space between dimensions. Everything seemed normal for the first few minutes. The drive hummed along smoothly, and the crew went about their usual business. Rodriguez was still wrestling with the coffee maker. Morrison was reading a message from his girlfriend back on Earth. Walsh was checking their navigation computers. Then the lights flickered. "That's not normal," Rodriguez muttered, looking up from the coffee maker. The ship shuddered. Not violently, but enough to make everyone look around with concern. Sarah set down her coffee mug and leaned forward. "Tom, report," she said. "I'm seeing some strange readings," Walsh replied, his voice tight with concentration. "The navigation computer is showing impossible coordinates. We should be in normal space by now, but the sensors are picking up massive gravitational distortions." Another shudder ran through the ship, stronger this time. The lights flickered again, and somewhere in the distance, an alarm started beeping. "Drop us out of hyperspace," Sarah ordered. "Now!" Walsh's hands flew over his controls. "I'm trying, Captain, but the drive isn't responding properly. Something's interfering with our systems." Rodriguez was already moving, pulling up diagnostic screens on her tablet. "The hyperspace field is destabilizing," she reported. "I'm reading massive energy spikes across all systems." "How massive?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "Bigger than anything I've ever seen," Rodriguez said grimly. "Whatever's out there, it's powerful enough to pull us out of hyperspace from the inside." The ship gave one final bone-rattling shudder, and suddenly they were back in normal space. The stretched star lines snapped back into points of light, but these weren't the familiar constellations they expected to see. The stars were wrong. Everything was wrong. "Where are we?" Morrison asked quietly. "I don't know," Walsh admitted, checking his instruments with growing alarm. "According to the navigation computer, we're nowhere. These star patterns don't match anything in our charts." Sarah stood up and walked to the main view screen. What she saw made her blood run cold. They were in a vast debris field, surrounded by the twisted remains of hundreds of ships. Some were so old they were barely recognizable as vessels. Others looked fresh, their hull plating still gleaming in the light of a nearby star. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the ships that were very much intact, massive dark vessels that dwarfed the Defiance like whales surrounding a minnow. They moved with predatory grace through the debris field, their weapons trained on the small human ship. "Contact," Morrison said, his voice cracking slightly. "Multiple contacts. I'm counting at least 20 ships, Captain. They're huge," Sarah stared at the alien vessels on the screen. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, all curves and flowing lines that suggested incredible technology. Each one was easily 10 times the size of the Defiance, and their energy signatures were off the charts. "Are they scanning us?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Morrison replied. "Very thoroughly. I'm also picking up communications chatter, but it's in a language I don't recognize. The universal translator is trying to process it." One of the alien ships moved closer, its massive bulk blotting out the stars. Sarah could see weapon ports opening along its hull, energy building in what looked like enough firepower to turn the Defiance into space dust. "Captain," Walsh said urgently, "I'm reading massive energy spikes from that ship. They're powering up weapons." Sarah nodded calmly. She had been in tight spots before. During the war with the Martian colonies, she had faced down 3 cruisers with nothing but a mining ship and a cargo hold full of fertilizer. This was different, but the principle was the same. Stay calm, think fast, and never let them see you sweat. "Open a channel," she ordered. Morrison looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Captain, they're about to blow us out of space." "Then, we better talk fast," Sarah replied. "Open the channel." The universal translator kicked in just as a new voice filled the bridge. It was deep and commanding, with an accent that sounded vaguely British despite clearly being alien. "Unknown vessel, you have violated the sovereign space of the Zeherian Empire. Identify yourself immediately or be destroyed." Sarah straightened her uniform and walked to the center of the bridge. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Defiance. We're explorers from the Sol system, and we seem to have gotten a bit lost. Would it be possible to speak with someone about docking arrangements? Also, do you happen to have a decent coffee shop?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could practically hear the confusion radiating from the alien ship. Finally, the voice returned, sounding distinctly puzzled. "Did you just request docking permission?" "Well, yes," Sarah replied reasonably. "Our navigation system took a bit of a beating, and we could use some time to make repairs. I'm sure we can work out some kind of trade agreement. We have some nice coffee beans from Earth that might interest you." Another long pause. Sarah noticed that the energy readings from the alien weapons were fluctuating, as if the ship's crew couldn't decide whether to fire or not. "You are aware," the alien voice said slowly, "that you are completely surrounded and outgunned by a factor of approximately 10,000 to 1? Sarah glanced around at her crew. Rodriguez was grinning and shaking her head. Morrison looked like he was trying not to laugh. Walsh just shrugged and gave her a thumbs up. "Oh, absolutely," Sarah said cheerfully. "You got quite an impressive fleet there. Very nice formation flying, by the way. But that doesn't really change the fact that we need to make some repairs, and you folks seem like the type who might be able to help us out." She paused and added, "Plus, I make a mean cup of coffee. It's the least I can do to thank you for not shooting us immediately." The alien voice was quiet for so long that Sarah began to wonder if the communication link had been severed. When it finally spoke again, there was a note of what sounded suspiciously like amusement in its tone. "Stand by, Earth vessel Defiance. You will be escorted to the flagship for processing." 3 of the massive alien ships moved into formation around the Defiance, their weapons still trained on the small human vessel, but no longer actively charging. Sarah sat back down in her command chair and picked up her coffee mug. "Well," she said to her crew, "that went better than expected." Rodriguez finally got the coffee maker working again. It gurgled to life with a satisfied wheeze, filling the bridge with the smell of fresh coffee. She poured herself a cup and took a sip. "Captain," she said thoughtfully, "do you think we should mention that we've dealt with worse than this?" Sarah considered the question. During her career, she had survived a reactor meltdown, 3 different wars, a plague outbreak that had killed half the population of Europa, and 1 particularly nasty divorce. She had also spent 2 years stationed on a mining platform where the coffee machine had been broken for 6 months and the recycled air had smelled like feet. Let's see how friendly they are first, she decided. No point in scaring them unnecessarily. Morrison was monitoring the alien communications chatter with growing fascination. Captain, I'm picking up quite a bit of radio traffic between their ships. The translator is getting better at processing their language. From what I can tell, they're confused. Confused about what? About us, Morrison replied. They keep referring to us as the small mad ones and asking each other if we're some kind of new psychological warfare experiment. Sarah laughed. Well, that's not entirely inaccurate. The alien flagship loomed larger as they approached. It was a magnificent vessel, easily 2 kilometers long and bristling with more weaponry than Sarah had ever seen on a single ship. Its hull was a deep purple color that seemed to shift and flow in the starlight, and strange symbols glowed along its surface. That's quite a ship, Walsh observed. I'm reading energy signatures that are completely off our scale. These people are way ahead of us technologically. Maybe, Sarah said, but technology isn't everything. During the Siege of Titan, we held off a fleet twice this size using nothing but mining equipment and industrial explosives. She stood up and smoothed down her uniform again. Rodriguez, make sure the coffee maker is working properly. Something tells me we're going to need it. As the Defiance was guided into the massive docking bay of the alien flagship, Sarah couldn't help but feel a familiar excitement. This was why she had become an explorer in the first place. The unknown. The unexpected. The chance to meet new people and hopefully not get killed in the process. The docking bay was enormous, easily large enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the Defiance. Strange alien craft lined the walls, and Sarah could see hundreds of beings moving around, performing various tasks. They looked vaguely humanoid, but taller and more slender, with elongated skulls and what appeared to be natural armor plating. Well, team, Sarah said as the docking clamps engaged, looks like we're about to make first contact with a galactic empire. Try not to start any wars, and remember what happened the last time Morrison tried to shake hands with an alien. Morrison blushed. That was one time, and how was I supposed to know that species considered physical contact a declaration of combat? Fair point, Sarah admitted. All right, people, let's go meet our new neighbors. And somebody grab the good coffee beans from the cargo hold. I have a feeling we're going to need to make a good impression. As the airlock cycled and the first breath of alien air entered their ship, Sarah Chen smiled. She had no idea what they were walking into, but she was sure of one thing. It was going to be interesting. After all, they were only human. And humans, as the galaxy was about to discover, had a talent for making the impossible seem routine. Admiral Kethvar had seen many things in his 300 years of service to the Zeherian Empire. He had witnessed the surrender of the proud Helian Confederacy, watched entire star systems bow before the might of the imperial fleet, and personally overseen the conquest of 47 worlds. But he had never seen anything quite like the small group of aliens currently standing in his flagship's reception chamber. They were called humans, according to their ship's database, and they were utterly baffling. The leader, Captain Chen, stood, with the relaxed confidence of someone attending a casual dinner party rather than a military interrogation. She held a steaming cup of what they called coffee, occasionally sipping from it and making small, appreciative noises. Her crew flanked her with similar casualness, looking around the massive chamber with the kind of interest tourists might show. While visiting a museum, impressive architecture, the one called Rodriguez commented, craning her neck to look up at the vaulted ceiling. What's the structural material? Some kind of crystalline composite? Kethvar blinked his large amber eyes. In his experience, captured prisoners usually begged for mercy or demanded to speak with their governments. They did not critique interior design. You are not afraid, he observed, his translator rendering his words into the human's primitive language. Captain Chen looked up from her coffee. Should we be? You've been perfectly hospitable so far. Thank you for that, by the way. Not everyone would extend such courtesy to unexpected visitors. The Admiral's aide, Commander Vextai, leaned forward and whispered urgently in his ear. Sir, perhaps they do not understand their situation. They are prisoners of war. Kethvar nodded slowly. Perhaps you do not understand, he said to the humans. You are prisoners of the Zeherian Empire. Your vessel has been impounded and you are completely at our mercy. The humans exchanged glances, and then Morrison, the young communications officer, started to chuckle. Oh, we understand, he said. But you have to admit, this is pretty nice as far as prisoner accommodations go. The last time I was captured, they threw me in a cell that smelled like rotting fish and fed me nothing but protein paste for a week. The last time you were captured? Vextai asked sharply. Martian separatists, Morrison explained cheerfully. Nasty bunch. They had this thing about hanging prisoners upside down for interrogation. Very theatrical, but not particularly effective. Walsh nodded in agreement. I was held by pirates for 3 months once. They kept threatening to space me, but their airlock was broken, so it was mostly just empty threats. Eventually, they got so frustrated they let me fix their navigation computer in exchange for better food. Kethvar found himself staring at the humans with growing confusion. You speak of capture and imprisonment as if they were routine occurrences. Well, Captain Chen said thoughtfully, not routine exactly, but it happens. Occupational hazard of exploration work. You go to enough strange places, eventually someone's going to take exception to your presence. She gestured around the reception chamber with her coffee cup. But this is definitely the most comfortable capture experience I've had. Great ambiance, excellent hospitality, and the gravity is just right. You don't always get artificial gravity that feels this natural. Commander. Vextai was making rapid notes on a data pad. Kethvar could see her writing things like possible military conditioning and unusual psychological profile. Tell me about your people, Kethvar said, settling back in his ornate chair. This Earth of yours. How large is your military? How many worlds do you control? Oh, we just have the one world, Captain Chen replied easily. Well, and a few colonies on nearby planets and moons, but nothing too impressive. Our military is adequate, I suppose. We've managed to avoid destroying ourselves completely, which is better than some civilizations can claim. One world, Vextai repeated, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. And yet you show no fear when confronted by a power that spans thousands of systems? Rodriguez laughed. Lady, with respect, you should see what we deal with on a daily basis back home. Last month, Australia tried to secede again because someone introduced a new species of spider that was only moderately venomous. We've got volcanoes that can wipe out entire continents, weather patterns that regularly try to kill everyone on the planet, and politicians. Trust me, an advanced alien empire is refreshing by comparison. Politicians? Kethvar asked, unfamiliar with the term. You know, Morrison said, waving his hand vaguely. The people who make decisions about things they don't understand, usually for reasons that benefit no one except themselves. Surely you have them here too. Kethvar thought about the Imperial Senate and winced slightly. Yes, he admitted. We have those. Captain Chen brightened. See? Common ground already? I bet we have more in common than you might think. The Admiral decided to try a different approach. Your ship's technology is primitive compared to ours. How do you expect to defend yourselves against a force such as the Empire? Defend ourselves from what? Chen asked, looking genuinely puzzled. Are you planning to attack Earth? Because that seems like it would be an awful lot of trouble for very little gain. We don't have anything you couldn't get easier somewhere else. No, Kethvar said, thrown off balance again. That is not the point. The point is that you are helpless before our superior technology. Walsh perked up at this. Oh, your technology is definitely impressive. Those plasma conduits we saw on the way in, for instance. Very elegant design. Though I have to ask, do you have redundant safety systems? Because if one of those conduits ruptures, you're looking at a cascade failure that could take out half the ship. Vextai stopped writing and looked up sharply. How do you know about our plasma conduit design? Basic engineering principles, Rodriguez said with a shrug. Energy has to flow somewhere, and if you don't plan for failure modes will plan for you. We learned that the hard way during the Great London Fire of 2387. The what? Kethvar asked. Long story, Chen said quickly. Involving poor urban planning and some very enthusiastic chemical engineers. The important thing is that we rebuilt better. She took another sip of her coffee and looked around the chamber again. Speaking of building, this ship really is magnificent. How long did it take to construct? 47 years, Kethvar said proudly. It is the finest vessel in the imperial fleet. 47 years, Rodriguez mused. That's impressive dedication. We built our largest ship, the Prometheus, in 6 months, but that was during wartime, so we had to cut some corners. Still, it lasted almost a full year before the reactor exploded. The reactor exploded? Vextai asked weakly. Spectacular light show, Morrison said with evident appreciation. Visible from 3 star systems away, the crew managed to evacuate. In time, though, so no permanent harm done. Kethvar was beginning to develop a headache. How do you speak so casually about such disasters? Practice, Chen said simply. When you've lived through enough impossible situations, you start to develop a sense of perspective about these things. She gestured to her crew. Rodriguez here survived the Titan reactor incident by jury-rigging a cooling system out of cafeteria, equipment, and her grandmother's knitting needles. Morrison once talked a rogue AI out of destroying a space station by teaching it to play poker. Walsh crash-landed on a planet populated entirely by carnivorous plants and somehow convinced them to give him directions to the nearest spaceport. How? Vextai asked, despite herself. Turns out they were just hungry, Walsh explained. I traded them my emergency rations for safe passage. Very reasonable folks once you got past the whole trying to eat you thing. Kethvar stood up abruptly and began pacing. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered anything like these humans. They spoke of catastrophes and disasters as if they were minor inconveniences. They showed no proper respect for superior firepower. And they kept asking questions about things like structural engineering and safety protocols. Admiral, Vextai said quietly. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that these beings are not as primitive as we assumed. Perhaps, Kethvar agreed grimly. He turned back to the humans. Tell me about your wars. The humans exchanged another one of those looks, and Chen set down her now empty coffee cup. Which ones? She asked. Your most recent major conflict. Chen thought for a moment. Well, there was the Third Corporate War about 50 years ago. That was fairly unpleasant. Before that, the Martian independence movement. Then the Jupiter Sea. Mining conflict, oh, and the Great Food War of 2341. The Great Food War? Kethvar repeated. Started over fishing rights, Morrison explained. Ended with half the Pacific Ocean on fire and 3 different nations threatening to use kinetic bombardment on each other's agricultural centers. We managed to negotiate a ceasefire when everyone realized they were about to starve to death. And before that? Vexitai asked, still taking notes. Oh, hundreds of others, Chen said casually. We've been fighting each other pretty much continuously for our entire recorded history. Sometimes over territory, sometimes over resources, sometimes over ideas. Once we had a war that lasted 30 years because someone stole a bucket. A bucket, Kethvar said flatly. Well, it was a very nice bucket, Rodriguez said defensively. Hand-carved, ceremonial significance, belonged to a monastery. These things escalate. The Admiral sat back down heavily. How many of your people died in these wars? Oh, millions, Chen said matter-of-factly. Billions, probably, if you count all of them over the centuries. Wars are messy things, but we keep building back stronger. It's what humans do. She smiled, brightly. But enough about our problems. Tell us about your empire. 47 conquered star systems is quite an achievement. How did you manage it? I'm always interested in hearing about effective organizational strategies. Kethavar found himself describing the empire's expansion, the careful balance of military might and diplomatic pressure, the logistics of governing such a vast territory. The humans listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking intelligent questions about supply lines, communication networks, and administrative structure. Very impressive, Chen said when he finished. Though I have to ask, how do you handle rebellion in the outer systems? Distance makes direct control difficult, and local populations have a tendency to get restless when they feel ignored by central authority. We have encountered some difficulties in that area, Kethvar admitted reluctantly. Have you considered a federal system? Walsh suggested. Allow local autonomy in exchange for loyalty to the overall structure. We had similar problems during Earth's unification period. Took us a while to work out a system that didn't result in someone threatening to nuke someone else every few months. Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. And regular cultural exchange programs help a lot. Nothing builds understanding like sharing. Food and stories. Speaking of which, would you like to try some real coffee? That stuff you've been serving is technically coffee, but it tastes like it was filtered through a gym sock. Before Kethavar could respond, she was already pulling supplies from her pack. Within minutes, she had rigged up a small brewing device and filled the chamber with an aroma that was considerably more pleasant than anything the ship's food processors could produce. As the humans cheerfully served coffee to increasingly bewildered Zeherian officers, Kethavar found himself wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. These strange little beings with their primitive technology and casual attitude toward catastrophe were unlike anything in his experience. And somehow, despite being completely outgunned and trapped aboard an alien warship, they had managed to turn a prisoner interrogation into what appeared to be an informal diplomatic reception. Admiral, Vextai said quietly, sampling her coffee with obvious pleasure, I think we may need to reconsider our initial assessment of these humans. Kethvar watched Captain Chen explain the finer points of coffee cultivation to a group of fascinated junior officers and nodded slowly. Yes, he said, I think we may. Commander Vextai stood in the observation deck of the flagship, watching the Defiance drift in space alongside 3 Zeherian patrol ships. What had started as a simple test of human capabilities had turned into something far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea, Admiral Kethvar muttered, standing beside her. The plan had seemed straightforward enough. The humans claimed to be peaceful explorers, but their casual attitude toward warfare and their strange lack of fear had made the command staff suspicious. A simple military exercise would prove once and for all whether these primitive aliens posed any real threat to the Empire. 3 patrol ships against 1 small exploration vessel. The humans would be outgunned, outmaneuvered, and hopefully humbled. Then they could proceed with formal diplomatic contact from a position of clear superiority. That had been the plan. Contact from Captain Chen, reported the communications officer. Put her through, Kethvar said with a sigh. The familiar voice of the human captain filled the observation deck, cheerful as always. Admiral Kethvar, thank you for arranging this exercise. I have to say your patrol ships are beautiful vessels. Very sleek design. Are those Mark 7 plasma cannons? Mark 9, actually, Kethvar replied automatically, then caught himself. Captain Chen, this is a military exercise, not a technical review. Oh, of course, Chen said apologetically. Sorry about that. Professional curiosity. Are we starting? Now? Vextai leaned toward the communications console. Captain, you understand the parameters of this exercise? Our ships will attempt to disable your vessel using minimal force. You are to evade and defend as best you can. Understood completely. Just to confirm, we're allowed to use any equipment and tactics at our disposal? Within reason, Kethvar said cautiously. No actual weapons fire, obviously. This is a training exercise. Perfect. Oh, and Admiral? You might want to tell your patrol ship captains to buckle their safety harnesses. Things might get a little bumpy. The communication link closed, leaving the observation deck in puzzled silence. Buckle their safety harnesses? Vexatai repeated. What could they possibly do that would require safety harnesses? On the tactical display, the 3 patrol ships moved into formation around the Defiance. Each patrol ship was twice the size of the human vessel and carried enough firepower to reduce it to scrap metal in seconds, even with weapons set to minimum. Power, they should be able to disable the primitive ship within minutes. Captain Zethrin of the lead patrol ship opened a channel. Admiral, beginning approach now. Target vessel appears to be powering up engines. Proceed as planned, Kethvar ordered. The Defiance began to move, but not in any pattern that made sense. Instead of trying to flee or taking an evasive course, it seemed to be heading directly toward the nearest patrol ship. Are they surrendering already? Vextai wondered. Unknown, Kethvar replied. Their trajectory is unusual. The human ship accelerated suddenly, passing dangerously close to the lead patrol ship, close enough that Captain Zethrin had to adjust course to avoid a collision. What are they doing? Zethrin demanded over the communication channel. They nearly rammed us. Stay focused, Captain, Kethvar ordered. Proceed with the exercise. But the Defiance was already moving again, this time toward the second patrol ship. As it passed, something was ejected from its hull. The object tumbled through space, glowing brightly in the infrared spectrum. Heat signature detected, reported the tactical officer. Multiple objects extremely hot. Temperature approximately 400 degrees standard. What are those? Vextai asked. Before anyone could answer, the second patrol ship's sensors began registering massive heat blooms all around it. The captain's voice crackled with confusion over the radio. Admiral, we're detecting multiple heat sources. Our thermal targeting systems are going crazy. We can't get a lock on the target vessel. Kethvar stared at the tactical display. The Defiance was now surrounded by dozens of hot objects, each one bright enough to confuse the patrol ship's sensors. What did they eject? Analyzing now, the tactical officer replied. Sir, it appears to be coffee. Coffee? Hot coffee, sir. Steam and liquid in containment vessels. They're using their food preparation systems to create thermal decoys. On the display, the Defiance continued its erratic course, leaving a trail of coffee-powered confusion in its wake. The patrol ships were struggling to maintain target locks, their sophisticated sensors overwhelmed by the simple but effective countermeasure. Clever, Vextai admitted grudgingly. Primitive but clever. Captain Zethrin's voice returned, sounding increasingly frustrated. Admiral, we still can't get a clean sensor lock. Request permission to switch to visual targeting. Granted, Kethvar replied. But even as the patrol ships began to rely on visual contact, the Defiance was implementing its next tactic. The small ship suddenly vented atmosphere from multiple ports, creating a cloud of ice crystals and debris that glittered in the starlight. Are they having a hull breach? The tactical officer asked. Negative, came Captain Chen's cheerful voice, over the open channel. Just a little atmospheric adjustment. Don't worry, we've got plenty of air to spare. The ice crystals spread out around the human ship, creating a sparkling cloud that made visual targeting nearly impossible. The patrol ships found themselves trying to shoot at shadows and reflections. This is ridiculous, Captain Zethrin muttered. How are they doing this with such primitive equipment? But the humans weren't finished, as the patrol ships closed. Despite the visual interference, something new appeared on the tactical sensors. The Defiance's communication array was powering up, but not for normal communications. Energy spike detected, the tactical officer reported. The target vessel is overloading their communications array. That's dangerous, Vextai said with alarm. If that array explodes, it could damage their ship. Captain Chen, Kethvar called urgently. Your communications array is overloading. Shut it down immediately. Thanks for the concern, Admiral, Chen replied calmly. But we know what we're doing. Rodriguez calculated this very carefully. The communications array reached critical overload and discharged in a brilliant flash of electromagnetic energy. The pulse washed over all 3 patrol ships simultaneously, and their displays went dark. Report! Kethvar barked. All 3 patrol ships have lost power to their primary systems, the tactical officer said with disbelief. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out their main computers. They're running on backup power only. On the display, the 3 patrol ships drifted helplessly while their crews worked frantically to restore power. The Defiance, meanwhile, had somehow survived its own electromagnetic attack and was moving away from the disabled vessels at a leisurely pace. How? Vextai demanded. How did they survive their own EMP attack? Simple, came Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice over the radio. We wrapped all our critical systems in whatever metal we had lying around before we fired. Old-fashioned Faraday. Cage principle. Been around for centuries. You built a Faraday cage out of spare parts? The tactical officer asked weakly. Coffee cans, mostly, Rodriguez replied proudly. And some aluminum foil from the galley. Works like a charm if you know what you're doing. Admiral Kethvar sat down heavily in his command chair. In less than 10 minutes, a primitive exploration vessel with a crew of 4 had disabled 3 of his patrol ships using hot coffee, vented atmosphere, and kitchen supplies. Admiral, Captain Chen's voice returned, should we continue the exercise, or would you like us to help your patrol ships get their systems back online? I think Rodriguez has some spare parts that might help. How do you have spare parts for our technology? Vextai asked. Oh, we don't, Rodriguez said cheerfully. But engineering is engineering. I bet I can jury-rig something that'll work. Might not be pretty, but it'll get the job done. Kethavar rubbed his temples. Captain Chen, please return to the flagship immediately. This exercise is concluded. Of course, Admiral. Oh, and sorry about playing rough. We tried to keep it gentle, but you know how these things go. Old habits and all that. As the Defiance headed back toward the flagship, Kethvar turned to his aide. Vextai, I want a full analysis of what just happened. How did they accomplish this? Vextai was already reviewing the sensor data. Sir, they used their ship's waste heat management system to create thermal decoys. They deliberately vented atmosphere to create visual interference. And they turned their communications array into an improvised electromagnetic weapon. That last one should have destroyed their ship, the tactical officer pointed out. According to their own reports, they've done this before, Vextai said, consulting her notes from the previous day's interrogation. During something called the Martian Independence Movement, they disabled an enemy cruiser using a modified mining laser and a cargo hold full of fertilizer. Fertilizer? Kethvar repeated numbly. They have extensive experience with what they call asymmetric warfare, Vextai continued. Fighting enemies with superior technology using improvised weapons and unconventional tactics. The Admiral looked out at his 3 disabled patrol ships, their crews still working to restore basic power. How long until they're operational again? At least 6 hours, sir. The EMP overload caused cascading failures throughout their computer networks. And the humans? Their ship shows minimal damage, some minor power fluctuations, but nothing serious. Kethvar nodded slowly. Summon the senior staff. We need to discuss this development. 20 minutes later, the flagship's main conference. Room was filled with the Empire's finest military minds, all looking deeply troubled. The tactical display at the center of the table showed a replay of the exercise, highlighting each stage of the human victory. Gentlemen, Kethvar began. "We have a problem." General Kethmore, the Empire's chief military strategist, spoke first. "Admiral, with respect, this was clearly a fluke. They caught us off guard with their unconventional methods. But now that we know their capabilities—" "Do we?" Kethvar interrupted. "Do we really know their capabilities? Because from where I sit, it looks like a crew of 4 humans with no military training just defeated 3 of our best patrol ships using coffee and kitchen foil." "They said they had no military training," Vexatai pointed out, "but their actions suggest otherwise. No civilian crew could execute those tactics without extensive combat experience." Colonel Pethval, the fleet's intelligence officer, consulted his datapad. "According to our analysis of their ship's database, humans have been engaged in warfare almost continuously for their entire history. Even their so-called peaceful exploration missions appear to involve significant combat preparation." "What kind of species prepares for exploration by learning asymmetric warfare?" General Kethmore asked. "The kind that has survived long enough to reach the stars," Kethvar said grimly. "Vextai, what else do we know about their homeworld?" Vextai pulled up additional data. "Earth is classified as a Class 9 death world, sir. Extreme weather patterns, geological instability, aggressive wildlife, and frequent global catastrophes. The humans have survived multiple extinction-level events and somehow continued to thrive." "A death world," General Kethmore said quietly. "That explains a great deal." "It gets worse," Vexatai continued. "Their ship's records indicate that their most devastating wars weren't fought against external enemies. They were fighting each other, their own species." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "Admiral," Colonel Pethval said finally, "I recommend we reconsider our approach to these humans. They may appear primitive, but they've clearly developed military capabilities we don't fully understand." Kethvar looked around the table at his officers, some of the finest military minds in the Empire, all looking deeply concerned about a single small ship crewed by 4 beings who claimed to be peaceful explorers. "Agreed," he said. "From now on, we treat the humans as potential allies rather than subjects for conquest. I have a feeling we're going to want them on our side rather than against us." As if on cue, Captain Chen's voice came over the intercom. "Admiral Kethvar, this is Captain Chen. We've finished our repairs and we're ready to help your patrol ships get back online. Rodriguez says she can have them operational in about 2 hours if you're interested." Kethvar exchanged glances with his staff and activated the comm. "Thank you, Captain. We would appreciate the assistance." "No problem at all," Chen replied cheerfully. "It's the least we can do after giving them such a hard time. Oh, and Admiral, your tactical officers might want to take notes. Rodriguez has some ideas about improving your EMP shielding that could be useful." The communication ended, leaving the conference room in contemplative silence. "Sir," Vextai said quietly, "are we absolutely certain we want to give them access to our technology?" Kethvar thought about the disabled patrol ships, the coffee can Faraday cages, and the casual way the humans discussed survival on a death world. "Vextai," he said finally, "I think the more important question is whether we can afford not to." Emperor Vextoth had ruled the Zeherian Empire for over 2 centuries. In that time, he had seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, witnessed the birth of new technologies that changed the galaxy, and personally commanded fleets that could reduce entire worlds to ash. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most powerful beings in known space. So why, he wondered as he sat in his throne room awaiting the arrival of 4 humans, did he feel nervous? The reports from Admiral Kethvar had been disturbing. Not because they described a new military threat, but because they described something far worse, the unknown. After 2 centuries of conquest and expansion, the Empire had grown comfortable with its place in the galaxy. They knew the capabilities of every major species, the limitations of every technology, the patterns of every form of warfare. These humans didn't fit any of those patterns. "Your Imperial Majesty," announced the Master of Protocol, "the human delegation has arrived. Send them in," Vextoth said, straightening in his massive throne. The doors to the throne room, each one carved from a single piece of crystalline, adamant and standing 30 meters tall, swung open with ponderous ceremony. The human delegation walked through, looking around with the same casual interest they had shown aboard Kethvar's flagship. Captain Chen led the group, still carrying that ridiculous coffee cup. Her crew followed. Rodriguez with a toolkit slung over her shoulder, Walsh with a data pad in hand, and Morrison looking slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the Imperial Palace. They walked the length of the throne room, past the assembled, representatives of 47 conquered worlds, past the honor guard of the Empire's finest warriors, past artwork worth more than most planetary economies. And they did it all with the relaxed confidence of people taking a guided tour. "Your Imperial Majesty," Captain Chen said, stopping at the appropriate distance and offering a polite bow. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, and these are my officers. I have to say, this is quite an impressive palace. The architecture alone must have taken decades to complete." Emperor Vextoth blinked. In 2 centuries of receiving diplomatic delegations, no one had ever opened with commentary on interior design. "Captain Chen," he said, his voice amplified by the throne room's acoustics, "welcome to the Imperial Palace. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Very much so," Chen replied. "Admiral Kethvar has been an excellent host. We've learned quite a bit about your empire during our stay." "And what have you learned?" "That you've built something remarkable here," Chen said sincerely. "The logistics alone of governing 47 star systems is staggering. The communication networks, the supply chains, the administrative structure. It's genuinely impressive." She paused and added, "Though I did notice some inefficiencies in your outer system governance that might be worth addressing." A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the assembled representatives. No one offered criticism of the Empire in the presence of the Emperor. It simply wasn't done. Vextoth leaned forward slightly. "Inefficiencies?" "Oh, nothing major," Chen said with a wave of her hand. "Just some communication delays that compound over distance and what looks like a fairly rigid command structure that might not adapt quickly to local conditions. We've dealt with similar issues during Earth's unification period." "Earth's unification period?" asked General Morthkai, the Empire's supreme military commander, from his position beside the throne. "About 300 years ago," Walsh explained. "We had a lot of independent nations that needed to be brought under a single planetary government. Took us about 50 years to work out a system that didn't result in someone threatening nuclear war every other Tuesday." "Nuclear war," Vextoth repeated slowly. "You had the capability to destroy your own world 300 years ago." "Oh, much longer than that," Morrison said cheerfully. "We first split the atom about 500 years ago. Within a century, we had enough nuclear weapons to destroy ourselves several times over. Fun fact, we actually did detonate a few of them, in anger, just to see what would happen." The throne room had fallen completely silent. The idea of a species voluntarily detonating world-ending weapons on their own planet was so far outside the realm of normal behavior that most of the assembled representatives couldn't quite process it. "And you survived this?" Vextoth asked. "Well, most of us did," Rodriguez said pragmatically. "Lost a few cities, learned some valuable lessons about radiation cleanup, and eventually decided that maybe we should try talking to each other instead of shooting. Though it took a while to convince everyone." "How long?" General Morthkai asked, despite himself. "Oh, about 200 years," Chen said casually. "We're a bit slow to learn sometimes. Plus, we kept getting distracted by other problems." "What sort of problems?" Vextoth found himself asking. Well, there was the plague of 2156 that killed about half our population, Walsh said, consulting his data pad. Then the asteroid impact of 2203, the supervolcano eruption of 2267, 3 different ice ages, several solar flares that knocked out most of our technology. Oh, and the Great Famine of 2298. How did you survive all of this? Demanded Minister Kethrall, the Empire's chief administrator. Stubbornness, mostly, Chen replied. Humans are really hard to kill permanently. We tend to bounce back from things that would wipe out most species. She took a sip of her coffee and continued. Plus, we've had a lot of practice dealing with existential threats. When your own planet is constantly trying to kill you, you develop certain survival skills. Emperor Vextoth was beginning to understand why Admiral Kethavar had seemed so unsettled in his reports. Tell me about your enemies, he said. Which ones? Chen asked. Your greatest enemies. The ones that posed the most serious threat to your species. The humans exchanged glances, and Chen set down her coffee cup with a thoughtful expression. Well, she said slowly, there's us, obviously. We're definitely our own worst enemy. Humans have a remarkable talent for finding new and creative ways to endanger themselves and everyone around them. Yourselves, Vextoth said flatly. Oh yes, Morrison said. We've fought more wars against each other than against anyone else. Some of them lasted centuries. The 100 Years' War was particularly unpleasant, though that was before we had really good weapons. What about external threats? General Mordecai asked. Define external, Rodriguez said, because technically most of our problems come from our own planet. Earth is what you might call an actively hostile environment. Hostile how? Walsh pulled up some data on his pad. Well, about 70% of the surface is covered with water that will kill you if you fall into it. The remaining 30% includes deserts that will kill you, frozen wastelands that will kill you, jungles full of things that will kill you, and mountain ranges that will kill you. Plus, the weather regularly tries to kill everyone with hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, and blizzards. And the wildlife? Asked Minister Kethrall, who was beginning to look distinctly pale. Oh, the wildlife is delightful, Chen said brightly. We have creatures that can kill you with poison, venom, teeth, claws, crushing force, electrical discharge, or just by being too cute to resist petting. Australia alone has about 47 different species that evolved specifically to kill humans, and that's just the ones we've cataloged. Australia? Vextoth asked weakly. It's a continent, Rodriguez explained. We use it primarily as a testing ground for survival skills and a place to put criminals. It's very educational. You put criminals on a continent full of deadly creatures? Well, it builds character, Morrison said defensively. And it's not like they can't leave if they really want to. They just have to survive long enough to earn passage off-world. Emperor Vextoth was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Let me understand this correctly, he said finally. Your species evolved on a world that is actively trying to kill you, developed the ability to destroy yourselves multiple times over, survived countless global catastrophes, and considers this normal? Pretty much, Chen said with a shrug. Though, I should mention that we've gotten much better at the whole not destroying ourselves thing over the past few centuries. We only had 3 major wars last century, and none of them involved nuclear weapons. Only 3, General Mordecai said, faintly. Down from 27 the century before, Walsh noted proudly. We're making real progress. And these wars, Vextoth said, what were they fought over? Oh, the usual things, Chen said. Resources, territory, ideology, the Third Corporate. War was mostly about fishing rights, but it escalated when someone bombed a seafood processing plant. Fishing rights, the Emperor repeated. Very important fishing rights, Rodriguez clarified. Those were some valuable fish. Minister Kethral leaned forward. Captain Chen, how many humans are there? About 12 billion last count, Chen replied. Give or take a few million. The census is always a bit approximate because people keep moving around, and some of the outer colonies don't report regularly. 12 billion individuals, Kethral said slowly. Each one a survivor of multiple global catastrophes, raised on a death world with access to planet-killing weapons and experienced in warfare. That's a bit dramatic, Morrison said. Most of us are pretty peaceful, actually. We just happen to be really good at not dying when things get unpleasant. Emperor Vextoth stood up from his throne and walked to the massive windows that overlooked the imperial capital. Below him, millions of beings from across the galaxy went about their daily lives in peaceful prosperity, protected by the might of the Empire. Captain Chen, he said without turning around, in your opinion, what would happen if humanity decided to expand beyond your current territory? Expand? Chen sounded genuinely puzzled. Why would we want to do that? We've barely finished exploring our own star system properly. There's still so much to discover right in our own neighborhood. But hypothetically, Vextoth pressed, if you decided to establish a galactic presence. Chen was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Well, she said finally, I suppose we'd do what we always do. We'd try to find the most efficient way to accomplish our goals while causing the least amount of trouble for everyone else. We're not really conquerors by nature. We prefer to build things rather than break them. And if someone tried to stop you, then we'd adapt, Rodriguez said simply. We always adapt. It's what we do. The Emperor turned back to face the human delegation. They stood there calmly, apparently unaware that they had just described themselves as the most terrifying force the galaxy had ever encountered. Captain Chen, he said formally, the Zeherian Empire would be honored to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. That's wonderful, Chen said, brightening. We'd be delighted to open trade and cultural exchange. I think both our peoples could benefit from closer cooperation. Indeed, Vextoth said, though his reasons for wanting closer cooperation were probably different from what the humans imagined. As the formal ceremony began, with representatives from across the Empire witnessing the historic first contact, Emperor Vextoth found himself thinking about the conversation that would need to happen with his military commanders. The galaxy had just met humanity. And humanity, it seemed, was the kind of species that survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and each other, then cheerfully offered to help with administrative efficiency. The smart thing to do, Vextoth realized, was to make very sure they remained friendly. Because if 12 billion Death World survivors with a talent for improvised warfare and an apparent immunity to despair ever decided they didn't like the current galactic order, the Empire's 47 conquered worlds would suddenly seem like a very small number indeed. Your Majesty, General Morthkai whispered as the ceremony continued, should we be concerned? Emperor Vextoth watched Captain Chen enthusiastically discussing trade agreements with Minister Kethral, while Rodriguez showed several Imperial engineers something involving coffee cans and electromagnetic theory. General, he said quietly, I think concerned doesn't begin to cover it. 6 months after first contact, Emperor Vextoth stood in his private study, staring at a report that should have filled him with satisfaction. Instead, it filled him with a growing sense of bewilderment that had become disturbingly familiar. The report detailed the recent improvements that human advisors had implemented across the Empire. On paper, everything looked magnificent. Efficiency was up 40%. Administrative costs were down 30%. The rebellion in the Outer Rim had simply stopped happening. 3 different species had voluntarily petitioned to join the Empire. Even the notoriously difficult senators were attending meetings regularly and actually passing useful legislation. It should have been a triumph. Instead, Vextoth couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer entirely in charge of his own empire. A gentle chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his study. "Come," he called. Admiral Kethvar entered, looking as confused as Vextoth felt. "Your Majesty, we need to discuss the situation in the Helian sector." "The former rebellion?" Vextoth asked. "I thought that was resolved." "It is," Kethvar said, settling into a chair. "That's the problem. 3 months ago, the Helian Confederacy was our most troublesome territory. They'd been in almost constant revolt for 50 years. Now they're sending us thank you notes." Vextoth pulled up the relevant files on his desk display. According to this report, productivity in the Helian sector is up 60%. Crime is down to virtually nothing. They've even started paying their taxes early. "Your Majesty," Kethvar said carefully, "they've started paying more taxes than we actually asked for." "More?" "Substantially more. They claim the humans showed them some accounting tricks that optimize resource allocation for mutual benefit." "I'm not entirely sure what that means, but the Helians seem very excited about it." Vextoth rubbed his temples. "What exactly did the humans do?" "As far as I can tell," Kethvar said, consulting his datapad, "Chief Engineer Rodriguez visited their primary industrial world to help them optimize their manufacturing processes. She ended up redesigning their entire economic system." "She redesigned their economic system?" "In 3 weeks," Kethvar confirmed. "Using what she called basic efficiency principles and a lot of coffee, the Helians are now producing twice as much with half the effort. And they're so happy about it they want to throw a parade in Rodriguez's honor." Vextoth was quiet for a moment. "Admiral, in your opinion, are we still in control of our own empire?" Kethvar considered the question seriously. "That's complicated, Your Majesty. Technically, yes. All the formal structures are still in place. The chain of command is intact. Imperial law is being followed. But somehow everything is working better than it ever has before, and I'm not entirely sure how. The humans keep making suggestions and offering to help optimize things, and somehow their suggestions always turn out to be revolutionary improvements." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. "Enter," Vextoth called. Captain Chen walked in, carrying her usual coffee cup and wearing a bright smile. "Your Majesty, Admiral Kethvar, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all." "Captain," Vextoth said, though he noticed that Chen had somehow acquired access codes to his private study without anyone officially giving them to her. "What can we do for you?" "Well, I was just reviewing the quarterly efficiency reports with Minister Kethral, and we noticed a few areas where we might be able to streamline operations even further." She pulled out a datapad and began displaying charts and graphs with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed administrative optimization. "For instance, the supply chain between the core worlds and the mid-rim has some bottlenecks that could be eliminated with better coordination. And the judicial system in the outer rim could probably handle 30% more cases with some minor procedural adjustments." "Minor adjustments," Kethvar repeated weakly. "Oh yes," Chen said cheerfully. "Nothing dramatic, just some scheduling optimization and a few workflow improvements. Morrison has some ideas about communication protocols that could speed up legal proceedings considerably." Vextoth found himself nodding along despite his reservations. "That sounds reasonable. Wonderful. I'll have Morrison prepare a formal proposal. Oh, and Rodriguez wanted me to ask about those manufacturing upgrades she discussed with the Helian Confederacy. They're so excited about the results that they want to share the improvements with the other sectors." "Share the improvements," Vextoth said slowly. "Free of charge," Chen confirmed. "They say it's the least they can do to thank the Empire for introducing them to proper engineering principles. Rodriguez is a bit embarrassed by all the attention, but she's agreed to help set up training programs for the other sectors." "Admiral," Kethvar leaned forward. Captain Chen, may I ask what these proper engineering principles actually involve? Oh, nothing too complicated, Chen replied. Basic stuff like redundant safety systems, preventive maintenance schedules, and quality control procedures. Standard practices on Earth, but apparently revolutionary here. She paused and added, though I have to say, some of your manufacturing processes were remarkably inefficient. We've seen similar problems during Earth's early industrial periods. The good news is that once you know what to look for, the solutions are usually pretty straightforward. Straightforward, Vextoth repeated. For example, Chen continued, warming to her subject, the antimatter refineries in the Kethmore system were operating at about 30% efficiency because they weren't accounting for thermal expansion in their containment fields. Rodriguez showed them how to adjust for temperature variations, and now they're running at 95% efficiency. They increased antimatter production efficiency from 30 to 95%? Kethvar asked in amazement. Well, it wasn't really that hard, Chen said modestly. Rodriguez just applied some basic thermodynamics. The local engineers were brilliant once they understood the underlying principles. They actually came up with several improvements that Rodriguez hadn't thought of. Vextoth was beginning to develop a headache. Captain Chen, these improvements you keep implementing, do you have some kind of master plan for reforming the Empire? Master plan. Chen looked genuinely puzzled. Your Majesty, we're just trying to help wherever we can. When we see inefficiencies or problems, we offer suggestions. It's just human nature to want to fix things that are broken. But surely you must have some overall strategy, Kethvar pressed. Not really, Chen admitted. We're making it up as we go along mostly, though Walsh has been keeping track of all the changes in case we need to reference them later. She took a sip of her coffee and continued. The thing is, most of the problems we've encountered aren't really problems of technology or resources. They're problems of organization and communication. Once you improve the flow of information and eliminate bottlenecks, everything else tends to sort itself out. And you learned this how? Vextoth asked. Experience mostly, Chen said with a shrug. Earth went through a lot of organizational growing pains during our unification period. We tried a lot of different approaches. Most of them didn't work. And eventually we figured out what did work. It's all just applied common sense, really. The Emperor and Admiral exchanged glances. Applied common sense was apparently a revolutionary concept in galactic governance. Captain, Vextoth said carefully, I've been reviewing the reports from across the Empire, and I noticed that everywhere your people have offered assistance, conditions have improved dramatically. The Helian Confederacy has stopped rebelling. The Outer Rim territories are actually cooperating with Imperial directives. Even the Imperial Senate has started functioning efficiently. That's wonderful, Chen said, beaming. I'm so glad we could help. But I have to ask, Vextoth continued. What do you want in return? Chen blinked in confusion. In return for what? For transforming our empire into the most efficient governmental system in galactic history? Kethvar said dryly. Oh, that, Chen said, as if they were discussing the weather. We don't want anything in return. We're just happy to help. You don't want anything? Vextoth asked suspiciously. Well, Chen said thoughtfully, it would be nice if we could get some of those. Zeherian coffee beans that grow in the Outer Rim, they make excellent espresso. And Rodriguez is fascinated by your antimatter containment technology. She'd love to learn more about that. You want coffee beans and technical specifications? Vextoth said flatly. And maybe some cultural exchange programs, Chen added. Morrison is very interested in Zeherian literature, and Walsh would love to study your navigation techniques. We're always eager to learn new things. Admiral Kethvar stared at Captain Chen with the expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Captain, you do realize that you've essentially reorganized our entire empire, don't you? Have we? Chen asked, looking genuinely surprised. I suppose we have made quite a few suggestions, but honestly, most of the work has been done by your own people. We just pointed out a few areas where improvements might be possible. She finished her coffee and set down the cup. The truth is, Your Majesty, your empire was already remarkably well organized. It just needed some fine-tuning here and there. You have excellent people. Good. I suppose that's one way to put it, Chen said cheerfully. Though I prefer to think of it as collaborative improvement. Your people have been wonderful to work with. The Emperor stood up and walked to his window again, looking out over the imperial capital. In the distance, he could see construction crews working on the infrastructure improvements that Walsh had suggested. New transportation hubs that would reduce travel time by 30%. Communication arrays that would improve coordination between sectors. Educational facilities that would train the next generation of imperial administrators in the new efficiency. Protocols. Captain Chen, he said without turning around. In your honest opinion, is the Zeherian Empire better than it was 6 months ago? Absolutely, Chen replied without hesitation. Your people are happier, more productive, and more prosperous. The government is more responsive and efficient. The military is better coordinated and supplied. And you've eliminated most of the conflicts that were draining resources and causing suffering. And you accomplished all of this by accident. Not by accident, Chen corrected. By instinct. Humans have a hard time leaving broken things broken. When we see a problem, we try to fix it. When we see inefficiency, we try to optimize it. It's just how we're wired. Vextoth turned back to face her. And if I asked you to stop making improvements? Chen looked genuinely distressed at the idea. Your Majesty, if that's what you want, of course we'll stop. But why would you want things to be less efficient? I wouldn't, Vextoth admitted. That's the problem. Admiral Kethavar chuckled. Your Majesty, I think we need to accept the reality of the situation. The humans haven't conquered our empire. They've adopted it. Adopted it? Think about it, Kethavar said. They show up, they see that we have problems, and they immediately start trying to fix them. Not for any personal gain, not as part of some grand strategy, but because they can't help themselves. They see suffering and inefficiency as problems to be solved. Chen nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly right. It's like adopting a stray animal, except instead of a cat, it's a galactic empire. A galactic empire, Vexitoth said slowly, that apparently needed adopting. Well, Chen said diplomatically, you weren't in terrible shape, but there was definitely room for improvement. Emperor Vextoth sat back down and looked at the efficiency report spread across his desk. 47 star systems running better than they ever had before. Billions of beings living more prosperous and peaceful lives. A government that actually functioned efficiently. A military that was better supplied and coordinated than ever before. And all because 4 humans had gotten lost and decided to help. Captain Chen, he said finally, I have a proposition for you. Yes, Your Majesty? How would you feel about making these arrangements permanent? Official advisory positions within the imperial government with full authority to implement whatever efficiency improvements you see fit? Chen's face lit up. That's a wonderful idea, though we'd need to bring in more people from Earth. There's so much work to do, and Rodriguez is already complaining that she can't keep up with all the engineering requests. As many as you need, Vextoth said. Consider it a formal alliance between humanity and the Empire. An alliance between equals, Chen said firmly. We're partners in this, not subjects or rulers. Partners, Vextoth agreed. Though I have to ask, what happens when your people finish optimizing everything? Chen grinned. Your Majesty, we're humans. We'll find something new to fix. As Captain Chen left to begin planning the expanded human presence in the Empire, Admiral Kethavar remained behind. Sir, he said quietly, do you realize what just happened? I think so, Vexitoth replied. We just formalized the most bloodless conquest in galactic history. Conquest? They show up. They make everything work better. And somehow we end up asking them to stay permanently and bring more of their people. If that's not conquest, It's the most effective form of diplomacy ever invented. Kethavar considered this. Sir, are you concerned about having humans integrated into every level of the imperial government? Emperor Vextoth looked at the efficiency, reports one more time, then at the view of his bustling, prosperous capital. Admiral, he said finally, 6 months ago I ruled an empire that was slowly stagnating under the weight of its own bureaucracy. Today I rule an empire that's more powerful, more efficient, and more just than it's ever been. And it happened because 4 humans got lost and decided to help. He paused and smiled. If that's what happens when humans adopt you, I can't wait to see what happens when they really commit to the relationship. Outside his window, the first group of human engineers was arriving to begin the next phase of improvements. They carried coffee, toolkits, and the kind of determined optimism that had somehow transformed the galaxy's most powerful empire into something even better. Emperor Vextoth had ruled for 2 centuries, but he was fairly certain that the real adventure was just beginning.